Hello, and welcome to the World War Lab channel. Today's story takes us high above Nazi Germany, into a moment where one man, one aircraft, and a single decision stood between survival and catastrophe. At 11:14 a.m. on January 11, 1944, Major Jonathan Howard circled his P-51B Mustang nearly 4 miles above the frozen countryside near Oschersleben, Germany. From that altitude, he watched a terrifying sight unfold below him, roughly 30 German fighters peeling out of the clouds and diving towards 60 American B-17 bombers flying without fighter protection. Howard was 33 years old and far from inexperienced. He had already flown 86 combat missions over China with the famed Flying Tigers. But this day marked only his 37th mission in a brand new aircraft that many senior officers quietly believed was a death trap. The P-51B Mustang, recently introduced and powered by a British-designed Merlin engine, was considered controversial, even reckless, for long-range escort duty deep into Germany. The fear wasn't unfounded. Over the previous 4 months, the 8th Air Force had lost 180 bombers in just 3 major missions once they crossed beyond the German border without escort. Entire formations had been chewed apart. The Mustang had entered combat barely 5 weeks earlier with Howard's unit, the 354th Fighter Group, the first American group tasked with testing this unproven aircraft over the heart of the Reich. Among pilots, they were known unofficially as the Pioneer Mustang Group. Between August and October of 1943, unescorted bomber losses had reached a staggering 60 aircraft per mission over heavily defended targets such as Schweinfurt and Regensburg. The disaster peaked on October 14th, later remembered as Black Thursday, when 60 B-17s were shot down in a single day. 600 airmen were killed or captured. The losses were so severe that Army Air Force's leadership came close to suspending daylight bombing operations altogether. Then came December 5th. 36 P-51Bs from the 354th Fighter Group flew the first true long-range escort mission all the way to Paris. Even then, High Command remained skeptical. The aircraft's range existed mostly on paper. Engine reliability at extreme distances was still unknown. Its combat performance against massed German fighters had not yet been proven. Howard's radio suddenly crackled with static. His 4-man flight had broken apart moments earlier, each pilot chasing a different attack. Now, there was nothing but silence. He was alone. Below him, formations of Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf Fw-190s closed rapidly on the 401st Bomb Group flying at 23,000 feet. The German interceptors had launched from 3 airfields around Braunschweig and had been tracking the bomber stream for 18 minutes. They were perfectly positioned. The leading German fighters opened fire from 800 yards out. One B-17, nicknamed Little Friend, took hits in both wings. Another bomber, Hell's Angels, lost an engine. Thick black smoke poured from its number 3 nacelle as the aircraft struggled to stay in formation. The bombers tightened up, but there was nowhere to run. Without escort, 60 bombers carrying 600 airmen would be exposed to the full force of the Luftwaffe for the next 37 minutes until they could reach friendly airspace. Howard pushed his nose down and dove. He came screaming in from above at over 420 miles per hour, his 6.50 caliber machine guns converging on the nearest Fw-190. The German pilot never saw him coming. Howard's first burst tore the fighter's tail apart. The aircraft spun away trailing smoke. Howard yanked back on the stick, pulling nearly 7 gs, lined up a Bf-109, and fired again. The Messerschmitt's canopy shattered. Glass and metal fragments spiraled into the thin winter air. He kicked the rudder, rolled inverted, and dropped onto another Fw-190. In 40 seconds, 3 enemy fighters were gone. 27 were still attacking. His wingman's voice should have been on the radio. Silence. His flight leader should have been calling rally points. More silence. Major Jonathan Howard, former Flying Tiger and current commander of the 356th Fighter Squadron, was now the only American fighter standing between 60 bombers and 30 German interceptors, deep over enemy territory nearly 300 miles inside Germany. Could a single P-51 survive against 30 Luftwaffe fighters? Like this story, share it, subscribe for more, and let's see what happens. Back to Howard. The German formation split. 15 fighters broke left, diving toward the bombers. The remaining 15 turned to deal with Howard. Both groups expected the lone Mustang to disengage. Fighter doctrine was clear: never engage when outnumbered by more than 2 to 1. Howard now faced 15 enemies in front of him, with 15 more behind. He checked his ammunition. 412 rounds remained in each gun, 2,472 rounds total. He was still 37 minutes from friendly lines. At altitude, the temperature was -42 degrees Fahrenheit. His guns would begin freezing soon. He attacked anyway. Howard's first pass shattered the German formation. He climbed back to 24,000 feet and deliberately placed himself between the bombers and the regrouping fighters. The Germans had not expected this level of aggression. Standard American doctrine called for defensive escort, staying close to the bombers, guarding them like shepherds. Howard wasn't guarding. He was hunting. At 11:17, 3 Bf-109s came straight at him head-on. The combined closing speed exceeded 700 miles per hour. Both sides opened fire at 600 yards. Howard's tracer rounds marched up the nose of the lead 109. At that distance, .50 caliber rounds carried over 11,000 foot-pounds of energy each. The Germans returned fire past wide. At 200 yards, the Bf-109 broke left, trailing smoke from its Daimler-Benz engine. White coolant streamed behind it against the pale winter sky. The other two fighters scattered. Howard reversed hard, pulling nearly 8 gs. He briefly blacked out as blood drained from his brain. When his vision returned, he was lined up perfectly on the tail of an FW-190. A 3-second burst, 90 rounds fired. The German fighter's right wing folded at the root. For down. Inside one of the bombers, Ball turret gunner Staff Sergeant William Thompson watched in disbelief as the lone Mustang tore through the German fighters. Thompson had flown 19 missions confined to his cramped steel sphere beneath the B-17. He had watched P-47 Thunderbolts escort them to the German border, then turn back. He had seen P-38 Lightnings struggle at high altitude. He had never seen anything like this. Thompson counted 6 separate attacks in just 4 minutes. The P-51 never stopped moving. It dove, climbed, rolled, constantly placing itself between the bombers and their attackers. The bomber's pilot, Lieutenant Robert Johnson, keyed his radio and asked for the Mustang's call sign. There was no response. The lone fighter was far too busy fighting for survival. The P-51B carried 280 gallons of internal fuel, along with 2 275-gallon drop tanks. Howard had already burned through the external tanks on the inbound leg. At combat power, internal fuel consumption ran about 2.1 gallons per minute. He had perhaps 90 minutes of fuel remaining. The bombers were still 32 minutes from friendly airspace, cruising at 190 miles per hour. If Howard stayed with them, he would reach safety nearly running on fumes. If he left now, he could return to RAF Boxted with fuel to spare. The Germans regrouped at his altitude. 26 fighters remained. 1 Mustang. Howard charged again. His tactics defied convention. Instead of chasing damaged aircraft, he went straight for formation leaders. At 11:22, he attacked out of the sun and slammed into the lead FW-190 of a 4-ship element. The leader broke away instantly. The formation scattered like startled birds. Howard didn't pursue. He climbed, repositioned, waited for them to reform, and struck again. He was exploiting the Mustang's greatest advantage, speed. At altitude, the P-51 could reach over 440 miles per hour in level flight, and Howard was using every knot of it. Altitude. The FW-190 could top out at roughly 480 miles per hour. The Bf-109 managed around 420. Howard exploited that gap relentlessly. He would dive, strike, then extend away faster than the Germans could follow. Using the excess energy, he would climb back up and repeat the cycle. No matter how hard they tried, they couldn't catch him during the extension. These German pilots were seasoned veterans. They weren't inexperienced replacements rushed to the front. They adapted quickly. They began attempting sandwich attacks, 2 fighters coming straight in head-on while 4 more dove from above to trap him. Howard saw the maneuver forming each time. He would feign the head-on pass, holding course just long enough to draw them in, then brake sharply to the right just before effective gun range. The diving fighters would overshoot, unable to correct in time. Howard would reverse hard, slide in behind them, and catch one as it tried to climb away. 5 down. His ammunition counters now showed only 240 rounds per gun remaining, half of his total gone. He still had 27 minutes to reach friendly lines. 25 German fighters were still circling the bombers. And now, his guns began to fail. The P-51B .50 caliber Browning M2 machine guns were mounted 3 in each wing. At 11:26 a.m., Howard's right outboard guns stopped firing altogether. The cause was brutal physics. The gun had overheated during sustained fire, reaching nearly 300 degrees, then was suddenly exposed to -42-degree air at 24,000 feet during high-speed maneuvers. The metal contracted instantly. The bolt froze mid-cycle. Standard procedure was clear: when guns malfunctioned, break off and disengage. Howard still had 5 working guns and 24 German fighters threatening the bombers below. He stayed. The Luftwaffe pilots adjusted again. They had been watching this lone Mustang for 13 minutes now. These men weren't amateurs. Several were decorated aces, holders of the Knight's Cross. They had survived years of combat over France, Britain, and the Eastern Front. They had learned his habits. He attacked from above. He went for leaders. He used speed to disengage. So they changed tactics. At 11:28, 8 FW-190s split into 2 4-ship formations. One group stayed high at 25,000 feet, deliberately visible, acting as bait. The second dropped low, out of sight beneath the bombers at 18,000 feet. They were setting a bracket. When Howard dove on the high group, the lower formation would climb straight into his escape path, boxing him in and ending the fight. Howard took the bait anyway. He rolled over and came down on the high formation at a 60-degree angle, airspeed climbing past 480 miles per hour. He was pushing the aircraft hard. The P-51's dive speed was limited by compressibility effects approaching Mach 0.75. He was right on the edge. His 4 remaining wing guns and 2 nose-mounted guns poured fire into the lead FW-190. Armor-piercing incendiary rounds walked from the tail forward into the cockpit. The German fighter rolled inverted, the pilot ejecting as a white parachute blossomed at 23,000 feet. Howard pulled up violently, 7GS crushing him into the seat. Blood drained from his head. His vision narrowed to a pinpoint. Gray closed in at the edges. He eased the back pressure just enough. Slowly, his peripheral vision returned. The 4 fighters that had been hidden below were exactly where he expected them, climbing toward him at 3,000 feet per minute, BMW radial engines screaming at full emergency power. Howard rolled inverted and dove straight at them. The German element leader saw a Mustang diving upside down directly at his formation at nearly 500 miles per hour and broke left in confusion. His wingmen instinctively followed. Fighter pilots were trained to anticipate rational behavior. This wasn't rational. It looked insane. The formation scattered. Howard rolled upright, lined up the trailing FW-190, and fired a 3-second burst. The fighter's tail section disintegrated. Control surfaces vanished in a spray of metal. 6 confirmed kills. Moments later, his left inboard gun stopped firing. He was down to 4 working guns, about 1,600 rounds remaining. Inside the bomber formation, Lieutenant Robert Johnson glanced at his fuel gauges. The 401st Bomb Group had been over the target area for 18 minutes. They had dropped 12,000 pounds of 500-pound bombs on the Focke-Wulf factory at Oschersleben. Smoke now rose more than 11,000 feet from the burning assembly buildings. They were heading home, but still 22 minutes from P-47 fighter coverage near the German border. The lone P-51 was still attacking. Johnson counted 9 separate engagements. The Mustang pilot hadn't paused, hadn't hesitated, hadn't disengaged once. At 11:33, Howard's ammunition counters dropped to 100 rounds per gun, 400 rounds total across 4 functioning guns. At his current rate of fire, a 3-second burst consumed roughly 90 rounds. That gave him 4 attacks, maybe 5 if he disciplined himself to 1-second bursts. The Germans still had 22 fighters operational. This time, they formed up tighter. Rotten pairs. Finger 4 elements. They had learned. They wouldn't scatter again. They understood this Mustang pilot now. Howard checked his fuel gauge. 73 gallons remaining. Enough to get home, barely, if he left immediately. The bombers were 19 minutes from safety. The German formation rolled over and dove toward them. 22 against 1. 4 working guns. 400 rounds. 73 gallons of fuel. Minus 42 degrees. His hands were numb inside his gloves. Howard climbed to meet them head-on. 22 FW-190s and BF-109s descended on the bomber formation in 3 coordinated waves. The first wave, 8 fighters, targeted the lead squadron. The second wave of 7 went after the high squadron. The third wave positioned itself to pounce on any stragglers. It was textbook Luftwaffe doctrine. Overwhelming force, multiple attack axes, divide the escorts, destroy the bombers. There was only one escort. At 11:34, Howard slammed into the first wave head-on. He selected the leftmost FW-190 and fired a 1-second burst. 30 tracer rounds converged. The fighter's engine cowling shattered. Pieces slammed back into the cockpit. The aircraft rolled away trailing thick black smoke. 7 confirmed. Howard pulled straight up, converting speed into altitude, climbing above the second wave as they committed to their attack run. They couldn't follow him vertically. At the top, he kicked over into a hammerhead turn, rolled, and dove back down onto their tails. He lined up the trailing BF-109 and fired another 1-second burst. The Messerschmitt's tail tore free. 8 confirmed. His right inboard gun seized. 3 guns remaining. 310 rounds total. The third wave was climbing toward him now, 7 fighters. Howard had lost his altitude advantage. His airspeed was bleeding off. He was below them. They had the sun. They had the numbers. Fed. Working guns. Every rule of fighter combat said the same thing. Run, build speed, extend away, reset the engagement. Howard did the opposite. He turned directly into them and began to climb. The lead German pilot expected the Mustang to roll over and dive. Instead, the American fighter was climbing straight at him, nose to nose yet again. Both pilots opened fire at 400 yards. Howard's 3 remaining guns hammered out 90 rounds in 3 seconds. Tracers from the German fighter walked toward the Mustang's nose. At 100 yards, both pilots should have broken off. Neither did. At 50 yards, the BF-109's propeller disintegrated. Shattered blades ripped through its own engine. The aircraft snap-rolled violently to the left. The pilot never got out. 9 confirmed. Howard flashed through the formation. 6 fighters were behind him now, all firing. Tracers sliced past his canopy, under his wings. 1 round punched through his left horizontal stabilizer. Another clipped his right aileron. The P-51 shuddered. The controls went soft, mushy. Howard shoved the stick forward and dove toward the cloud layer at 15,000 feet. The Germans followed him down. Inside the clouds, he pulled the throttle back, rolled inverted, counted silently to 10, then rolled upright and pulled hard. The Mustang burst back out of the cloud tops behind the pursuing fighters. They had overshot him. Now he was on their tails. He picked the last aircraft in the line, an FW-190, and fired a 2-second burst. 60 rounds. The German fighter's canopy blew away. The pilot slumped forward. The aircraft fell into a spin. 10 confirmed. Then his left wing gun seized. 2 guns left. 160 rounds. The formation scattered once more. Howard climbed back to 24,000 feet. His fuel gauge read 58 gallons. Below him, the bombers were 16 minutes from safety. Far off to the west, he could see them, tiny black dots against the sky. P-47 Thunderbolts, racing in as fast as they could. Relief was coming, but it was still 12 minutes away. The Germans regrouped again. 19 fighters left. They were no longer trying to reach the bombers. All 19 were focused on him now. 1 pilot, 2 guns, 160 rounds, 58 gallons of fuel. 12 minutes until help arrived. His oxygen warning light flickered. Low pressure. His mask felt loose against his face. With numb fingers, he tightened the straps. The German fighters formed line abreast. 19 aircraft stretched across nearly 2 miles of sky. No clever tactics now. Just mass and firepower. Howard turned toward them. When they opened fire, it would create a wall of lead half a mile wide. No room to evade. No escape route. Only one option: fly through it or die trying. Howard glanced at his ammunition counter. 160 rounds total across 2 guns. 80 rounds per gun. At 600 rounds per minute, that meant 8 seconds of firing time per gun. 16 seconds total if he fired both together. The range closed. 1,000 yards. 900. 800. The Germans opened fire at 700 yards. Too early. Their rounds fell short. Howard waited. 600 yards. 500. At 400 yards, he squeezed the trigger. Both guns fired. A 3-second burst. 90 rounds gone. 70 remaining. His tracers converged on the center aircraft, a Bf-109. The wing root erupted. The fuel tank detonated. An orange fireball bloomed at 23,000 feet. The formation split around the explosion. Howard dove through the gap. 11 confirmed. He pulled up on the far side, rolled, and climbed again. The Germans reformed behind him. 18 fighters now. And they were furious. This lone American had destroyed 11 aircraft. Killed 11 pilots. Made a mockery of an entire Jagdgeschwader. They closed again. Tighter formation this time. No gaps. Howard's fuel gauge read 49 gallons. His oxygen warning light was now solid red. Each breath came harder than the last. The altitude was getting to him. Hypoxia crept in. His fingers tingled. His vision narrowed. He shook his head, forced himself to focus. The bombers were 13 minutes from safety. The P-47s were 9 minutes out. 9 more minutes. That's all he had to hold. The Germans attacked again. Howard turned into them and fired his last 70 rounds in one long burst. For seconds, both guns fell silent. He saw strikes on an FW-190's engine cowling. Smoke streamed out as it broke away. Maybe a kill. Maybe not. His counters read 0. No ammunition left. The Germans knew. They had watched his firing patterns, counted his attacks, calculated his load. They knew he was Winchester, out of ammo. 18 German fighters closed in on one unarmed P-51. They spread out, surrounding him. This was the end. Howard kept attacking. No guns. No ammunition. Just speed and fury. He dove at the nearest Bf-109. The German pilot saw him coming, saw no muzzle flashes, realized the Mustang wasn't firing. He held his course, expecting Howard to break away. Howard didn't. He lined up on the 109's tail and closed to 50 feet. The German broke first, diving away. Howard followed him down to 18,000 feet, glued to his tail. The 109 leveled out and tried to extend, but it couldn't. The Mustang was faster. Howard closed to 20 feet. The German pilot looked back and saw the Mustang's propeller inches from his tail. He broke hard left, nearly stalled, recovered, and dove for the deck. Howard climbed back up. 37 gallons of fuel. 12 minutes to safety. 8 minutes until the P-47s arrived. 17 German fighters remained. They formed up again. Came at him again. Howard turned into them again. Guns empty. Fuel low. Oxygen failing. His hands shook on the stick, not from fear, but from cold and hypoxia. The temperature was minus 44 degrees. His cockpit heater had failed 20 minutes earlier. One unarmed P-51. 17 German fighters. 8 minutes. He kept fighting. At 11:41 a.m., Howard dove at another Bf-109. No gunfire, just pure intimidation. The German held his course for 3 seconds, then broke away. Howard followed him through the break, staying on his tail through 2 full rolling scissors. The German pilot was skilled, but Howard was better. After 40 seconds of pure maneuvering, the German disengaged, dove away, and gave up. One enemy fighter neutralized without a single shot fired. Inside the B-17 Hells Angels, co-pilot Lieutenant James Wilson watched through his side window. The lone Mustang was still there. Still fighting. 27 minutes into the engagement. Wilson had counted 12 separate dogfights already. Now the P-51 wasn't firing at all. It was simply chasing German fighters until they broke away. The Luftwaffe pilots began to hesitate. Each time the Mustang closed in, they turned and fled. They assumed it was a trap. They believed other American fighters were hiding above them in the sun, waiting to pounce. There were no other Mustangs. Just one pilot, one aircraft, and 0 ammunition. The German formation leader finally made a decision. He split his force. 8 fighters stayed high to deal with the Mustang. 9 peeled off and dove toward the bombers. If the American wanted to keep fighting, let him fight, but the bombers would be destroyed. Howard saw the split immediately. He had to choose. Fight the 8 above him, or save the bombers from the 9 diving below. He couldn't do both. He turned toward the 9. He intercepted them at 19,000 feet, coming in from their high 7 o'clock. He lined up on the leader, even though he couldn't fire. The German leader saw the Mustang closing fast and broke hard to the right. His wingman followed. The formation fell apart. Howard slid in behind another FW-190, closing to within 30 feet. The German pilot looked back, saw the Mustang filling his canopy. No muzzle flashes, but he broke anyway, diving away. Howard chased 2 more fighters, got in behind both of them. Both disengaged. The bombers were safe, for the moment. The 8 fighters that had stayed high were now diving on Howard. He pulled up to meet them. His airspeed bled away rapidly. 190 knots. 170. 150. Stall speed was 120. He was hanging on the propeller, barely flying. The Germans opened fire at 200 yards. Rounds passed beneath him. He kicked rudder, skidded left. More rounds flashed past. He shoved the nose down, dove hard, rebuilt speed. 200 knots. 250. 300. He pulled back up. The Germans had overshot again. Howard glanced at his fuel gauge. 28 gallons remaining. The warning light flashed red. 5 minutes of fuel at combat power. Maybe 7 at cruise. The bombers were 7 minutes from safety. The P-47s were 4 minutes out. He could see them clearly now, 36 Thunderbolts with black and white invasion stripes, charging in from the west. At 11:44 a.m., the German formation leader called off the attack. The P-47s were too close. The Americans would soon have overwhelming numbers. It was time to disengage. 18 German fighters turned east, heading back toward their bases around Braunschweig. They had lost 11 aircraft and 11 pilots, to one Mustang. Howard watched them go. His engine coughed as fuel pressure dropped. He leaned the mixture carefully. The engine smoothed out. He turned west and fell in behind the bombers. The P-47s formed a protective ring around the B-17s. One Thunderbolt pilot slid in alongside Howard and gave him a thumbs up. Howard nodded back, too exhausted to do more. At 11:47 a.m., 33 minutes after it had begun, the fight was over. All 60 B-17s headed home. Every single bomber Major James Howard had defended survived. Not one was shot down. 600 airmen lived because one pilot refused to leave. Howard's fuel gauge read 11 gallons when he crossed the English coast at 12:23 p.m. He landed at RAF Boxted at 12:51. The P-51B rolled to a stop on the hardstand. Ground crews rushed toward the aircraft. They'd heard the radio chatter, something about a lone Mustang over Germany. They opened the canopy. Howard sat motionless for 10 seconds, then climbed out. His legs nearly buckled. He had been in the cockpit for 3 hours and 37 minutes. 90 minutes of continuous combat. He walked around the aircraft with his crew chief, Technical Sergeant Henry Radowski. Radowski counted the damage. One bullet hole through the left horizontal stabilizer. Another through the right aileron. 37 hits total. Most were small-caliber German machine gun rounds from long range, but 3 were 20mm cannon strikes. One shell had punched through the wing root and missed the fuel tank by 6 inches. Radowski looked at Howard and asked how many he got. Howard shrugged. Maybe 3. Maybe 4. Hard to tell in the fight. The 401st Bomb Group landed back at their base in Dientorp at 1:37 p.m. Every aircraft returned. Lieutenant Robert Johnson climbed out of his B-17. His ball turret gunner, Staff Sergeant William Thompson, went straight to the intelligence officer and told him about the lone Mustang. Over 30 minutes of combat. One fighter defending 60 bombers. The intelligence officer didn't believe him. He checked with other crews. Same story. Again and again. 18 different bomber crews all reported the same thing. One P-51, call sign unknown, pilot unknown, fighting alone for more than half an hour. The 8th Air Force launched an investigation. Mission logs were checked. Only one P-51 from the 354th Fighter Group had remained with the bombers that long. Aircraft number 43 to 6315. Pilot, Major James H. Howard. Flight records confirmed he had landed with 11 gallons of fuel. Gun camera footage showed 11 confirmed kills. Bomber crew testimony confirmed repeated defensive actions that saved the formation. On January 13th, just 2 days after the mission, Lieutenant General Ira Eaker, commander of the 8th Air Force, arrived at RAF Boxted. He interviewed Howard personally and asked him to describe the engagement. Howard was reluctant. He said he was just doing his job. Eaker pressed him. Howard finally gave a brief account. About 30 minutes of fighting, maybe 11 kills, ran out of ammunition, kept attacking anyway. Eaker took notes and submitted a Medal of Honor recommendation that same evening. The process moved unusually fast. Most Medal of Honor recommendations took months. Howard's took 6 weeks. On March 6, 1944, Brigadier General Jesse Oughton presented Major James Howard with the Medal of Honor at RAF Boxted. The citation read, "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity above and beyond the call of duty in action with the enemy near Oschersleben, Germany, on January 11, 1944. Howard became the only fighter pilot in the European theater of operations to receive the Medal of Honor during World War II. Not because he destroyed 11 enemy aircraft, but because he defended 60 bombers alone for 37 minutes. Because he kept attacking after his ammunition was gone. Because 600 airmen made it home to their families. That mission changed fighter doctrine. Before January 11th, American fighters stayed close to bomber formations, flying strict defensive escort. After Howard's stand over Germany, fighter units were authorized to pursue attackers aggressively, to hunt the enemy instead of merely shielding the bombers. The 354th Fighter Group, the so-called Pioneer Mustangs, proved that the P-51B could fight and win at any odds. Within 3 months, 14 of the 15 8th Air Force fighter groups converted to Mustangs. But there was something else. Something the after-action reports never fully captured. Something the Medal of Honor citation never mentioned. The bomber crews never forgot. All 60 B-17s returned from Oschersleben on January 11th, 600 men. After they landed, word spread through the 8th Air Force. A lone Mustang. One pilot. 37 minutes. Bomber crews began asking questions. Who was he? What squadron was he from? The 401st Bomb Group tracked down Howard's unit. On January 18th, 7 days after the mission, crews from the 401st traveled to RAF Boxted. They found Howard, shook his hand, thanked him. Some of them cried. Staff Sergeant William Thompson, the ball turret gunner who had watched the entire fight unfold, told Howard he had counted every engagement. He told him he had never seen anything like it. He told him he owed his life to that silver P-51. Thompson went on to survive 23 more missions. He made it home to Pennsylvania. He named his first son James. The 354th Fighter Group continued combat operations until May 8, 1945, V-Day. The Pioneer Mustangs flew their final mission over Germany that morning. Their final tally stood at 701 aerial victories, more than any other American fighter group in the European theater. 42 pilots became aces. They paid a price. 128 P-51s were lost in combat. 60 pilots were killed or listed as missing. 54 were captured. Howard flew 26 more combat missions after Oschersleben. He shot down 6 additional German aircraft, bringing his total to 17. But he was never alone again. Fighter Command revised escort procedures after his mission. No more solo actions. No more individual heroics. Flights stayed together. Mutual support became doctrine. Howard agreed with the change. What he had done on January 11th was necessary, but not repeatable. The P-51 Mustang went on to become the dominant American fighter of the war. By December 1944, 14 of the 15 8th Air Force fighter groups flew Mustangs. They escorted bombers to Berlin and back, operating at a 700-mile radius. The Luftwaffe could no longer hide. Allied fighters could reach anywhere in Germany. Bomber losses dropped from 9% per mission in October 1943 to less than 2% by the spring of 1944. The strategic bombing campaign that nearly collapsed in 1943 succeeded in 1944 because of fighters like the P-51 and because of pilots like James Howard. Howard survived the war and returned to the United States in November 1944. The Navy offered him a position as a test pilot. He accepted. He flew early jets, tested carrier operations, and helped develop fighter tactics later used during the Korean War. He retired as a brigadier general in 1966 and passed away on March 18, 1995, at the age of 84. The legacy of the 354th Fighter Group lives on. Every fighter pilot still trains on the lessons Howard proved on January 11, 1944. Aggression wins fights. Speed is life. Altitude is life insurance. Never abandon your bombers. And sometimes, one pilot in the right place at the right moment can change everything. James Howard didn't just save 600 lives that day. He proved what a determined pilot flying an untested fighter could accomplish. He showed that innovation, courage, and skill could overcome impossible odds. He became the standard against which fighter pilots still measure themselves. That is the story of the Pioneer Mustang Group, and the day one pilot defended 60 bombers alone over Germany. If this story inspired you, smash that like button and subscribe for more forgotten heroes of World War II. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. We read every single one. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.